Welcome, soulmates. In this class, we're going to learn how to cut a well-fitting trouser directly on the fabric, right? You can see how fitted it is. We're cutting it directly on the fabric. Very easy and straightforward. So let's go right into the class. Okay, if this is what you like to learn, urge you to watch this to the end to get the best part of it. So we're going to be cutting the trouser first, and here I have my fabric folded into two. You can see the way I place the fabric. The stripe is on the straight um, line, okay, just to give it a high push. So once I folded it into two, this is for the front. I marked out 1.5 inch from this side. This is going to serve as my sewing allowance. This is where I'm going to take my sewing allowance from. So my measurement will begin from this 1.5 down to where it's going to stop. So from the top here, I'm going to be removing, you can remove either 1 inch or 1.5 depending on the size of band that you want. So I'm going to be minusing the 1.5 inch band that I want. Then I'll mark my hip line and my crotch line. To learn more about this crotch line, you will need to watch the video that talks about crotch calculation, and the link is in the description box. So leaving this 1.5 out, I've marked my hip line, which is 8.5, and then my crotch line, I'm going to be using 10 inches. Okay, 10 inches. The hip size is 42. I don't want to use 10.5. I'm using 10 inches for my crotch line because I don't want it to be too high. So I'm going to also mark the 10 inches right here. So on the crotch line, I'm going to mark my hip divide by 4, which is 10.5, and this is it. I'm going to be adding 2 inches to serve as my crotch extension for the front. 2 inches serving as crotch extension for the front, and then this line I ruled it up, which is my hip line, just to serve as a guide, 10.5. Right, so from this line here, which is the hip line that I measured the same thing here, 10.5, I'm going to mark my waist measurement. The waist we're working with is 33. So from this line, I'm going to mark 33 backwards plus 1 inch for that. Okay, plus 1 inch for that. And I'm going to be marking it. So from here now, I'm going to connect back to my hip line. This is the hip and the crotch connected together. So I'm going to be connecting it back to my waistline. Right, so from here, I'm going to come down by 1 inch or 3/4 of an inch for the front. I'm going to be doing 3/4 of an inch, or yeah, I'm going to do 3/4 of an inch, not 1 inch, so that I can have my sewing allowance there too. So I'm going to connect this back to this point. You can do 1/2 inch so that the remaining 1/2 inch will serve as your sewing allowance. But I'm not going to use so much allowance, so I will leave it at that. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is to get our knee line. For the knee line from the crotch depth, I'm going to mark 12 inches down, and that is where my knee is going to be. 12 inches from the crotch extension, or from the crotch depth. I'll be marking 12 inches. So here is my knee line. I'm going to connect it on a straight line so that it will be clear. And in case you're not seeing this clearly, at least you can hear my voice and follow the instruction. Okay, for the crotch line too, I'm going to rule a straight line so that it will be visible, right? And then it's also good, we're connecting our crotch extension 2 inches back to the waistline, half of the waistline, this line here, the hip line that connects to the waist, we'll connect it backwards to serve as our crotch line. So here I have my knee line, and here I have the length of the fabric. I want to centralize this knee line. So from this crotch extension to my measurement here, I'm going to divide it into two, which I've already done. Whatever it gives me, I'm going to mark it here and measure what I have here, okay, from the measurement to the midpoint, and I'll mark the same thing on the knee area, and I'll mark the same thing on the length of the trouser. Right now, so at the knee area from the midpoint, I'm going to take my knee measurement. We're working with knee of 19, and I'm going to be measuring 4 3/4 from one side and 4 3/4 on the other side. Okay, so 4 3/4 here, 4 3/4 here, and I'm going to be connecting it back to my measurements before adding my sewing allowance. You can do this on a straight line or a semi-curved line. And I'm also going to be connecting this one from here. I'm going to be connecting it to my measurements. Okay, so at the knee you can decide how much freeness you want at the knee. So at the knee I'm going to be doing 15 inches, which is 15 divided by 4. Whatever it gives me, that is what I'm going to be marking on both sides. And I'll be connecting it from the knee down to the measurement. Okay, so this is what we have for the front. I'm now going to add my allowance, sewing allowance by the side. On this side, I'm going to be adding 1 inch, and on this side, I'm going to be adding half an inch. So I'm going to place this on the next piece and cut the back side. So I place the front on the back side. At this part, I'm going to increase it by 1.5 inch. 1.5 inch and connect it back to the waistline here, right? Then at this point, I'm going to be adding 1 inch to this crotch extension for the back. I'll be adding 1 inch to the front extension and connect it half inch on this part down to here. Then every other place there, I'm going to add half an inch to it, right? That is just what I'm going to do. So for the joining, I'm going to sew this back, join it half an inch to this point, join the front half an inch to this point, then put them together, right side to right side, front and back together, right? And then I'll fix my band.